everyone, and welcome to Berkshire Environmental Action Today. I'm your host, Bruce Nguyen, President of Berkshire Environmental Action Team. And with me today is Jim Murphy, Outreach Coordinator, Region 1 EPA. Thanks for coming back again, Jim.
Thanks for having me back.
Last time you were here, we talked a little bit about the process, about the PCB cleanup in the Housatonic River and how we got to the point we're at now. And we also discussed the cleanup of the first 2 miles of the river, which is completed at this point.
Correct.
What I thought we could talk about today is the cleanup of the rest of the river, which hasn't happened yet, but it's in the planning stages.
That's correct.
Could you tell us a little bit about the time frame, what's going on now in terms of the cleanup of the rest of the river?
Okay. Where we are now is we have recently, EPA as well as the state of Massachusetts and the state of Connecticut have put out a status report. We have been having discussions with the state, the 2 states over the last several months, just trying to get together as far as our approach for cleaning up to the rest of the river. We're conducting a series of public meetings now, just informative meetings to let people know the issues we discussed and what we see as a conceptual approach to the cleanup. The next step that we're hoping this summer is we will release a proposed plan, and that will have a more specific plan for what we think is the best way of approaching the cleanup. At that point, we will have a series of informational meetings, as well as then we'll take comment from the public, as in both of the states, as well as GE, getting people's feedback on what we think is the best approach. Typically we would have a 45-day public comment period. We've been working on this so long, it's a very complicated area, so we expect people will ask us for a little bit more time. So we'll probably end up with a significantly long public comment period, maybe 60 days, maybe more, depending on what's needed for people to really get there, have an opportunity to understand what we're putting out there, and giving people an opportunity to provide feedback to us. At that point, we would close the public comment period, take the comments, make any type of adjustments to the plant as necessary based on the comments, and then we would come ahead with a decision. Before we announce our decision, part of the process that we set up a number of years ago is that we would first inform GE of what our decision was. They have an ability at that point to dispute it if they choose to do so. That could take some period of time also.
That's the great unknown, I would think.
That is one of the unknowns, yes. And at that point, we would then announce our decision. At that point, there's an appeals process that people who have participated in the process, provided comments and so on, would have an ability to appeal our final decision. So depending on who appeals and how long that takes, it first goes to an internal EPA review board, and eventually could go to a federal court system for the appeal. So we really, that is one of the unknowns. We don't know how long that process will take. But essentially, I think what people should focus on is that we hope to have this summer a proposal for people to comment on. Okay.
Now, even though that proposal isn't out right now, you have had public meetings where you've talked a little bit about the ideas that are being floated.
Correct.
And your thoughts on some of those.
Right.
One of the ideas that is still out there is the idea of capping. Capping in the river, or capping down at Woods Pond. I think we started talking about this the last time you were here, right at the end, and we kind of ran out of time, but I think I did mention that I think capping is just a bad idea.
Right.
My thought on that is that caps always fail. It's a stopgap measure at best. And I'm wondering that there are 9 criteria, as I understand it, that are supposed to be met or considered in coming up with a proposal for the various aspects of the cleanup. And capping, if I could just mention a few of the criteria here. And my thought on these criteria is that for each of these criteria, although you can make a point that capping hits each criterion, it seems that the proper analysis is to look at capping versus taking out the PCBs, in which case taking out the PCBs seems to hit them better. For instance, the top 3 criteria, the general standards of first-tier assessment, overall protection of human health and the environment, I would think that taking out the PCBs would hit that better. Control of sources of releases, compliance with ARARs, which is the
other federal and state standards that we
So for those 3, I would think that taking the PCBs out would hit those criteria better than capping. And the other 6, long-term reliability and effectiveness, attainment of intermediate protection goals, reduction of toxicity, mobility, and volume, short-term effectiveness, those 4, I would think that also taking out the PCBs hits them better. I could see for the next 2, implementability, possibly it's easier to implement the cap. And for the last one, cost, it would probably be less expensive for the cap. But other than those last 2, it seems that the criteria are met much better by taking out PCBs than by capping.
Yeah, so those, I mean, the criteria are the standards that we would hope, when people provide comments back to us, that they would be looking at those criteria when they're making their comments. Now, capping, the first 3 that you mentioned, protection of essentially human health and the environment, we feel can be met by capping. With the approach we have with capping is that we would actually remove some amount of PCBs, whether it would be in the river channel or the floodplain. The idea that a cap is used to really isolate the contamination, and our feeling when we're looking at capping, how that would work, is that we would take enough PCBs out to install a substantial cap that we feel will last over time and will hold up to the stressors that the river will experience over years. And again, it is open to debate, and we don't expect that everyone is going to agree that capping is the best way to go. But if you look at the corrective measures study, which was a study that GE put forward with their ideas about proposals, we had discussions about what should be in that, and we included capping as something that should be in some of the alternatives that we could look at. I don't recall if they had any alternatives that actually removed all the PCBs. There are a lot of PCBs out in the river channel as well as the floodplain. I don't want to say it would be impossible to get at them all. It would be very intrusive. Some of the implementability, the short-term impacts, the criteria need to be balanced. And again, different people are going to have different views as to what the best balance is going to be. So I think at this point we have to wait and see. Capping is something that EPA has used on rivers all around the country, and we feel it's been successful. So we'll just wait to see what the people of the Berkshires think about.
So it sounds like what you're saying as one thought regarding capping is that you would be getting out the PCBs and then capping on top of that.
Correct.
So it's not just putting a cap on the river as it sits now. You'd be removing PCBs and capping.
Correct. That would be the combination that, at this point, it's hard, we don't know exactly what we're going to put forward, but, what we put forward in our conceptual paper is that approach.
Yeah, I know when we do a river cleanup, some of the things we pull out of the river are just amazing. Shopping carts that are buried a couple feet down, and we have to get the shovels and dig them out. We've had flagpoles with the big cement blocks at the bottom that once were the base in there, and they've come downstream, so they've been driven downstream a ways, and the image I have is of these things bouncing over this cap, and I'm just wondering if it's durable enough to take that kind of abuse.
Right. Well, one of the components of the remedy also will be long-term monitoring and maintenance. That is one of the downsides of a cap, is that it does have to be maintained over the long run, and that's going to be GE's responsibility. As part of the remedy, we'll establish, at what frequency they have to go out and do inspections, do repairs, etc. So all of that will be in the remedy proposal and then the final decision. So we don't have specifics on that yet, but that will definitely be a part of it, is the maintenance of the cap, if there is a cap over time.
Looking at the 2 miles that have already been completed up in the Pittsfield area, right around the former site of the GE plant, that was the major source of a lot of the PCBs. That remediation in that area was very aggressive.
Right.
If you look at it now, it's remarkable how well it's come back and what it looks like now. It's a beautiful river, even in those places where the remediation was done.
Right.
And if you think of that as a model for the rest of the river, it would seem to argue that you could do a fairly aggressive cleanup without disturbing the aesthetics, at least, of the river. And since the outcome of that is removal of the PCBs, I think you can come to the conclusion that it would also be a great benefit to the wildlife there. For instance, in that 2-mile stretch, the sampling of invertebrates, for instance, has been, I think it's a 97 or 98% reduction in the PCBs, and that's the base of the food chain. So you can expect over time to see that kind of improvement come up through the food chain, and eventually even get up to the piscivorous mammals that are there and what have you. So all of that would seem to argue for a more aggressive approach to a cleanup of the rest of the river. And if people haven't seen this, I do have a couple photos here, if I can.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that the first 2 miles of the river are different than the rest of the river. I think the first half mile, which was the cleanup that GE implemented and completed, was through the most heavily contaminated area right alongside where their facility was located. And that was a pretty extensive cleanup. When we then went to the next, and most of the PCBs were, we treated them differently. We didn't try to get all the PCBs out in the first half mile and then the next mile and a half. We did get a lot out in the second mile and a half. Because most of the contamination was in the first couple of feet. So we did remove most of the PCBs in the mile and a half, whereas the first half mile GE did leave a lot there. They removed a lot, but then it was also capped. Now the cap I think you're talking about is the riprap, the heavy large stone that we used throughout the 2 miles. And one of the reasons for using that was just to really hold the banks in place. That particular area, all along that section of the river, there were either businesses or residential properties. People who were concerned about not losing their backyards, for instance, having them slide into the river or having us, go further into their yards to recreate the bank. As you move further south in the river, there, we're dealing with mostly state-owned property, or property at least that's not residential, and we had the ability, instead of creating the channel and the cap like that, to really kind of feather back the banks, just to take a different approach with the banks. There are a number of folks who are very concerned that we leave some of the banks, the eroding banks, because of the special habitat there. So that's something that we are trying to incorporate into our proposal.
I know there was a lot of discussion about the riprap, the white stones, the armoring that was right there. But here's a picture of the riprap and what it looks like now. It's coming back nicely. This is it's hard.
You can hardly see it, and I think one of the things that I think people have gotten a little bit less upset about that over time, because they can see the river coming back. The riprap is the sediment has covered it in a lot of the area that we did remediate in the past years, and people can see the growth that's coming up the trees and the brush and so on. So it does look more natural. Another thing to remember about that first stretch of the river is that it had been channelized back in, I believe, the late 40s by the city and the Army Corps of Engineers, a flood control measure, so it really wasn't a natural river to start with. And, a lot of people said, well, we ruined the natural river. Well, if you look at the pictures from back in the the 40s, when that was done, every tree within sight was gone, and it was just plain riprap. They didn't make the restoration effort that GE and EPA performed during the first 2 miles, where we replanted, literally a couple of thousand trees as well as brush, trying to get native habitat to grow up again.
Yeah, and as you said before, the river south of Pittsfield is so different that it's unlikely that we'd need that sort of riprap except in some very specialized
Right, I think we would be looking at
or
bridges, right, to protect the infrastructure, and there was a lot of infrastructure in Pittsfield that we did need to protect.
Yeah, and it like I've said, that the river has come back from that aggressive remediation remarkably. Here's a photo that GE used in their video to show what the remediation was going to be like.
Right.
This is the view at Dorothy Amos Park, which isn't part of the 2-mile cleanup, but it was a special case on the west bank of the river. Yep. This is what remediation looked like there, and after, this is what it looks like today. So it came back nicely, and that was an aggressive enough site that GE used it to show what worst case scenario would look like. Although it actually wasn't worst case scenario. I think that the Newell Street area actually looked, and this is what the Newell Street area looked like during the cleanup.
Right.
Very special case where they actually diverted the river through tubes for a while and dried it, and there was a lot of equipment in there. But that same area today,
right,
looks like this.
Yeah, it's a dramatic difference. And again, whatever cleanup that we do in the rest of the river, it is going to be. It's not going to be pretty when it's happening. We're going to be very carefully working with local landowners, the states, GE, in planning, the access points to the river, how quickly, what increments we will do the river. All of those things happen later during the design phase.
So it's not going to be that whole stretch done
It's not going to be the whole
You're going to be
stretch.
taking it in bites.
That's right.
So.
And I think that's important for people to know, because a lot of people feel the river's going to be out of bounds for 10 years or however long it's going to take. And really, we're going to be in certain areas for certain lengths of time. It's hard to say right now. We could be in one section of the river for several months or a year or something, but we'll be moving downstream. We would also are going to consider maybe doing some work further downstream in the impoundments at the same time that we're doing the work upstream. So those are decisions that'll be made really, though, during the design phase.
Will you have some flexibility in your plan so that you can learn from the upstream sections as you go south?
Yes, and we call that adaptive management. It's something that I think we've heard from a lot of the residents out here, that it'll be really important that we incorporate that, and it just makes sense that we would do one stretch of the river, look at the lessons learned, what could have been done better, and try to incorporate those lessons into the next section.
Now, one of the other great successes, I think, in the 2 miles is the Vernal Pool that was remediated there.
Right.
Again, there's a photo of what that Vernal Pool looks like now after being remediated, after the PCBs have been removed. And it's not just the aesthetics of the pool and the landscaping, the wildlife there, well, it's PCB free now, we can assume.
Right.
And the amphibians and the invertebrates have come back the very first season. The biology of the pool didn't skip a beat.
Right.
So I'm thinking that as you move south down the river, that these vernal pools are deserving of full remediation all the way down, because what this tells us is that it can be done, and it can be done not only without harming the wildlife, but benefiting them.
Right.
So I'm wondering what your thoughts are going forward.
Right. Well, there's a wide range of opinions on that. I'm sure you know as to how successful remediating vernal pools could be. Would we, destroy what was there? A number of folks say they can't be remediated. We can hold out, GE's work on that first vernal pool and say that it was successful. And I think in that status report that we recently published, we do have a section in there about our approach to vernal pools. I don't want to say it's going to be a science project, but there are a lot of a lot of people, I think, who will be watching, who will be involved. We're working closely with the state Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, who have various experts related to vernal pools. Our approach will be to get, there are, I believe, about 80 vernal pools in the Rest of River area. I don't recall how many are in the, the top section that we would first attack, but if there were 8 or 10, we will go in there and, before doing anything, really go out to resample them, go out to, do a survey of what animals and life is out there. So that we get up-to-date information before we make any kind of decisions. It may be that we may be able to use some vernal pools as a control. Leave a couple of them alone, but monitor them as we potentially remediate some other ones, or use different approaches in even some third set of them. So those are the type of things that need to be discussed as we move forward. But I think we're going to go out there. We're not going to leave contamination in areas where people can be exposed to it. That's very clear. There's still some amount of debate though on exactly what our approach in each vernal pool is going to be. Each one is really going to be treated differently.
Yeah. I think as I've said, I think in the case of the first 2 miles though, we have a great model for what to expect and what to try going forward. And I like your suggestion about having some vernal pools that are set aside as controls. So you have some baseline, something to compare them to as you go forward. But my thought on that would be that once you've gone along and you've remediated some number of vernal pools, and assuming you've had successes with those, then at some point those controls, you'd want to remove that control status, and eventually you'd be remediating the control vernal pools as well. Maybe that could move south as you went.
Right, and that, again, that'll all be part of the process. I can't, say we're going to go back and grab those, but I think if, it would be common sense that if we had great success that pretty much everyone agreed on, that we would.
That you wouldn't want to leave.
Because I think there's just a lot of doubts right now as to how successful it can be. People will say, that, well, that was one pool you were very successful in, but the next one's different. So
so take it slowly. I would agree, and as you said, adaptive management. Learn as you go forward. The other thing I would point out in the pool that's in the first 2 miles is one of the species that came back almost immediately with a fairy shrimp, which one of my favorite creatures in there. But they're very fragile and very sensitive. So the fact that they came back so quickly, I think, really bodes well for moving forward with vernal pool remediation.
Right. Yeah, I can't comment too much on that. I'm not a biologist, but it was good that they returned.
Yeah, and the amphibians, the wood frogs came back the very first season. The green frogs, which have been portrayed as a problem in the vernal pool, they were there before remediation started. They were there during remediation. They were there after. So I've heard the argument before that if you remediate a vernal pool, you clear the trees, and that lets in more light, which the green frogs like, and they're predatory on some of the more desirable species. But that didn't seem to occur here. They were there before, during, and after the remediation.
Yeah, so, and I know your organization has paid very close attention to that as well as other vernal pools, and it's great to have organizations like yours out there,
thank you,
watching us along the way and giving advice.
And I should point out that our mission is to protect the environment specifically for wildlife. So we do care about all the people, and we care about those health concerns too, but our focus is really on wildlife. So we pay careful attention to the vernal pools and their biology and what the impact will or will not be going forward in the cleanup. We have a couple of minutes late. More to go. Is there anything else that you wanted to get out there?
Nothing specific. I think just getting back to the process again, where we're really looking forward to making sure everybody has an opportunity to understand what we propose once we propose it, because I keep hearing, I even got a couple of calls this morning that we're rushing this, people can't get to these meetings that we're having, but
I've noticed that they're online. You can view them.
They are online. If you go to our website, www.epa.gov, NE for New England.
That's /NE.
/NE/GE.
Yeah.
There you will be able to find videos of the meetings that we had, the two that we had a couple of weeks ago, the one we're going to have tonight in Connecticut and then tomorrow night in Lenox. Their live webcasts, you can get them on the web to watch them as they're actually happening, and then the video will be on there, as well as, the question and answer. We're also have up on our web kind of the summary of the past meetings, which includes all the questions from the audience and the answers that we provided. So we're going to do our best to make information accessible to people, and anyone who feels like they're not getting it should feel free to call me.
Well, you've provided a lot of opportunity for people to become part of the process.
Right, and we want to continue to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jim.
We're done already.
We're done already.
Well, thanks for having me, Bruce.
Thanks for coming back.
Okay.
And thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching.